I do think there is kind of a major fight going on within Christianity as a whole, or so-called Christianity, for who has the truth, or who is going to speak the loudest.
Virtually from the minute we wake up every day, we are in cultural conflict. We're meeting people whose lives and beliefs are very different from our own. But what if bridging those cultural divides starts not with having to agree with everything somebody says, but with a curiosity, with a sense of respect that makes us want to engage more and find out what other people believe, connect with them. In a world that's shifting faster than ever, can learning to navigate diverse worldviews and cultural intelligence transform conflict into connection? In this show, we're going to look at how we can develop that kind of cultural intelligence to build stronger relationships with people who are here in our own communities, wanting to connect with people, and we as believers can be the ones who help them do that. Help them even gain clarity about the truth of Scripture and do it in the spirit of compassion. My guest today is Richard Lombard. Richard's the founder and executive director of WorldviewU, and he's a certified cultural intelligence trainer. So he teaches worldview and cultural intelligence to adults and students from a Christian perspective. Formerly at J.P. Morgan Chase, he led cross-cultural discussions for several years there. He's got degrees in earth and environmental science, also has a background in IT, project management, and auditing. Richard's a world traveler. He's an outdoor enthusiast, lives in Columbus, Ohio. Cheers for the Buckeyes. Don't let that stop you from listening to the rest of the show. Let's welcome Richard Lombard to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Richard Lombard, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. It's great to be here with you.
We've known one another for quite a long time, and you've been a guy who's been intensely interested in how a biblical worldview applies to the most difficult issues of our day. So let's just review. Things are crazy out there. It's an insane time in which to live. People are wondering, is this the end of all things? Globalization, immigration issues, cultural clashes. We've seen in some of the most intense cultural clashes, honestly, that I've seen during my lifetime. I mean, I've always known people to really argue, but I haven't known people to, literally take up arms and assault one another and kill little children over their warped beliefs, as we have seen in the news just recently. And so I'm really glad to have you on the show, because maybe the best place to start would be, can you just kind of give us a sense of where you see all of this playing out in schools? And I'm going to want to focus in on the workplace too, because you've been a corporate guy, but also in our communities. What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, there is a revival going on in some places around the country, especially on college campuses. And I live here in Columbus, Ohio. There's a huge revival going on at the Ohio State University, which is great to see. But those are just pockets around the country. And I see kind of a broader pushback against Christianity in various ways. I think that pushback has to do with Christianity's stance on certain social issues. But I also see that pushback being a result of the current administration's kind of association with Christianity, and many people just vehemently being opposed to what some of the things the current administration is doing.
Richard, when you think, I want to follow up on that specifically, because here's how I hear all these people saying, if you're a Christian and you're a conservative, then you're a Christian nationalist, and Christian nationalists are kind of like fascists. I look back at the history of the church, and it seems to me that these, what we call mainline denominations now, they pushed out the conservatives a long time ago. And so conservatives went out and started their own churches, non-denominational churches or different denominations. And lo and behold, more people wanted to go to those churches than the previous churches. And so you have this,
Right.
you have the mainline denominations continuing to sink and these other churches growing. How much of that kind of a cultural conflict do you think is just, I don't know, a jealousy over an inability to control what people do?
Well, I think first of all, it's really sad to see the, uh, the huge shift in the Christian church, overall, as far as the traditional, denominations versus the more evangelical and conservative non-denominational churches that have arisen. And I do think there is kind of a major fight going on within Christianity as a whole, or so-called Christianity, for who has the truth or who is going to speak the loudest. And so even though the traditional denominations have maybe lost membership over the years, I think there are still many very loud voices that are trying to speak on behalf of them. And they're speaking mainly on these social or cultural issues. And in the process, unfortunately, the gospel has been either watered down or removed in the process.
Okay. Well, this is some of your thinking as you founded WorldviewU to try to help people deal with these cultural issues. And you've developed an idea, and you call it cultural intelligence. I'd love to have you describe what that is, because I don't know how to even sequence these things sometimes, and I'm having to speak to them, in the media and other places. It seems like I just end up kind of doing a little bit here and a little bit there. But how do you help people come together and get the big picture?
Well, I'll start off by explaining what cultural intelligence is, because it's a term that many of us are not familiar with. And basically, it is an ability to communicate and interact effectively with people from various countries or cultures. And in some circles, it's called cultural competence. I like to refer to it with the phrase cultural dexterity. And it's something that all of us possess to some level, but it's actually a skill that can be developed as time goes on. And it's not just a knowledge about other countries and cultures, although that's certainly a big part of it, but it's an ability to adapt our own conversation and our behavior according to the cross-cultural situation that we are currently in, or the person that we're talking with from another country or culture. And so I'm not the one that started this whole idea of cultural intelligence, but I do think it is vitally important for us as Christians, if we are to love our neighbors effectively, to learn about cultural intelligence and learn, therefore, about the worldview of our neighbors, and to learn about cultural intelligence so that we can be behaving or acting and saying things in a culturally sensitive way so as not to offend them.
Can you give us some examples of what that looks like?
Oh, certainly. One example is with our Muslim friends or friends from India, for example. So if you are going into the home, one of their homes, the most respectful thing to do is to take your shoes off before entering their home. And that's not typical in many other cultures or countries, but in Muslim homes and Indian homes, that is the thing to first of all do. Another example that I've had to learn the hard way is that when being introduced to a Muslim woman is not to offer to shake their hand, because physical contact between a Muslim woman and a non-family member is not to be done. So I wait for the woman to extend her hand to me in greetings, and then I will shake her hand, but only then.
So the examples you're giving are with people of different different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different nationalities. Is there something about cultural intelligence that can help somebody in the workplace today with different worldview conflicts? So not to go straight to the most controversial possible issue, but when people say, my name is Jerry and you can call me they, them, how does cultural intelligence help you in situations like that?
Well, I would say, first of all, that's a very challenging situation. And I face that in my workplace. So I work for an organization outside of my work with WorldviewU that works with people who are new Americans, either immigrants or refugees, and we help them with various social services. But I do face that with someone that works at my organization, and that is challenging. But I think as a follower of Christ, it's really important for us to understand worldviews and cultural intelligence because the two go hand in hand. And if we have a better understanding of a person's worldview and some of their cultural distinctives, then we have a better opportunity, first of all, to understand them as a person, to understand where they're coming from, what their beliefs are. And we are going to be more effective in showing them respect and, loving our neighbor as Jesus has commanded us to do.
There's often an edge in these kinds of situations, almost as if the person is sort of, knowing that you're a Christian, daring you to do something that they would consider to be disrespectful so that they can in turn feel justified in disliking you. Do you have any thoughts about how to work around that or how to get around that kind of a sticky situation?
Well, I think there are several ways to handle that situation or a situation like that where it's just, first of all, to respectfully decline an invitation or an offer that doesn't meet up with my Christian values. But I also see opportunities, kind of getting back to differences in worldviews in the workplace, and as an opportunity to find out what is motivating someone by asking them about their worldview, or so they may ask you something that puts me in a difficult situation, or ask me to explain my position on something, or invite me to do something that I wouldn't be comfortable doing. But that also opens a door, though, for me to find out more about where they're coming from. And so I can oftentimes, turn it around, and as opposed to keeping the focus on me, just asking them questions about, maybe, what their spiritual upbringing is, what their spiritual beliefs are, or where they're coming from. And oftentimes they're willing to share about that.
I think, we think about social and political issues with people who are here in the States already, differences between political parties. But I think when I think about what your work is, you're trying to draw us to a bigger picture. There are people of all the nations of the earth who are coming to the United States of America, where most of the viewers and listeners to this program are. And we're finding ourselves in a place where we've got neighbors who we have nothing in our upbringing is common to what's common with their upbringing. And so we've got to find a way to connect. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So let's say you're in a community and people move in from a different country. What do you do? How do you approach that?
Well, I've been able to experience that, first of all, in my work, because I was a case manager directly assigned to some new American families who were refugees from the Congo. And First of all, there was a language barrier where I didn't speak, their language, whether it was, French or Swahili or Kinyarwanda, and they didn't speak English. But we have some tools to use that help us to understand each other, whether it's an app, like Google Translate or something like that. But the first thing I think to do with anyone who's new is to make the first step. Bill Hybels in his book a long time ago wrote, just walk across the room. And making that first step and initiating a conversation, greeting someone with a handshake and a warm, sincere smile is the first way to begin. And then welcoming them, to the U.S. Or as a new neighbor. So I think it's important for us to maybe go over to their house, knock on their door, and say hello. Welcome them to the apartment complex or the neighborhood, and just ask them if there's anything that they need, anything that we can do for them. And eventually, the hope would be to be able to establish a friendship with them through, maybe several interactions where you can invite them over to your house. And one of the tragic things about many immigrants and refugees who live in the U.S. is they, for years, never have an opportunity to step into the home of an American who's lived here all their lives. And so they don't get a chance to see how people like us live. And they don't make those connections. And they're so insulated from people outside their own community. So just making those first steps goes a long way.
Yeah, so entirely aside from the issue of what our policy should be toward people who are here illegally, there are lots of immigrants who are coming to this country from different places. And how are they ever going to understand what it means to be in America, to be American, if we're not the ones who are actually initiating the interaction with them and welcoming them into the community?
Well, and that gets to the fact that cultural intelligence or cultural competence is a two-way street. So not only do we have an essential responsibility to learn about their culture and how to show them respect and treat them with kindness, but also I think those who are new to the U.S. have a responsibility to develop cultural intelligence about how things are done in the U.S. And cultural intelligence boils down to, this is the way that we do things around here. Whether you're in the U.S. or another country or in, my home or in their home. And a little bit of cultural intelligence, goes a long way in that regard.
What do you think the biblical basis is for this? I know we want to look for opportunities to share the good news about Jesus Christ, but is there a biblical basis for the way you approach cultural intelligence?
Well, I think first and foremost is the command that Jesus gave us to, love our neighbor as we love ourselves. But something that just recently came to mind is the fact that Paul, the Apostle Paul, was a great example of demonstrating cultural intelligence, because in 1 Corinthians 9, he says that to the Jew, he became a Jew. To those without the law, he became one as those without the law. He became all things to all people, so he might win some. And so he was adapting either the way he spoke or the way he acted, or was willing to lay aside some of his own, rights to do some of the things that people from other cultures that he interacted with did, so that he might be more effective in relating with them. And so I just think that's a great example to follow.
So Richard, ultimately, we want people to come to a knowledge of the truth through Jesus Christ. What are some of your thoughts about how to open up a conversation about the gospel with people who are coming from a very different place culturally?
I think the first thing is to ask people about their beliefs. And sometimes that's a difficult topic to, kind of bridge with someone. Sometimes when I ask that question, it just kind of comes out of the blue. There isn't a real smooth segue. But, I may ask a question like, I have a deep question for you, and that is, what are your spiritual beliefs, or what is your spiritual background? It's a topic that interests me a lot, and I'd love to find out, about that with you and your story. And oftentimes they're very willing to share. And I think especially people of other religions, maybe from outside the U.S., are very willing to talk about their faith. Although, we in the U.S. oftentimes think that people are very scared of talking about religion or about faith. But I find that to be just the opposite. And so I think by learning about someone else's belief system and asking some questions about, maybe how they practice their faith, or, were their parents of that same faith, where did their faith come from? That eventually kind of gives you the right to share about your own faith. And so oftentimes after they've seen that you've expressed an interest in learning about, their spiritual background, they will come around and ask you, about your faith, my own faith, and what it's all about. And so that is, of course, an open door to give my testimony about how I came to saving faith in Jesus Christ.
Richard, as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, so many of the big, what we think of as cultural conflicts of today are, it's political, Democrat, Republican, and you think, oh wow, if I live in a community where I'm not sure what people believe, I probably shouldn't bring that up because it'll be too tense. But there are people coming to this country from other countries, it sounds like from what you're saying, who are ready to learn, want to make friends, want to interact, want to talk about spiritual things. And they're ready, and they're our neighbors.
That's right. Well, think about the people who are coming from a predominantly Muslim country where there is no opportunity to learn about Christianity or other religions, or even some communist countries where religion is definitely downplayed or discouraged. And so I think many people, whether they're international students attending colleges here in the U.S., or other refugees and immigrants who have moved here to live permanently, they are curious about what is going on in the U.S. and what the beliefs are of people who've lived here all our lives. And so, again, I think they're very open to conversation. And, my prayer is that they're going to be open to, hearing the gospel, and the Holy Spirit will develop that curiosity so that they really learn what the message of Christianity is all about.
I'd love to hear some stories. I know with your work with WorldviewU and cultural intelligence training that you've seen the gospel bring that kind of transformation. What do you have any stories of people or relationships or organizations that you've seen really impacted by this?
Well, there are a couple of things I'll share, I think both from a worldview as well as a cultural intelligence point of view. One with worldviews. A while ago, I had a series of coffee house conversations about the big questions in life. And so various people, maybe 20 or 25 people attended, those where we talked about questions like, how do we know that God exists? What is the afterlife? What is the meaning of life? And so forth. And those conversations had an impact on a Jewish woman who attended that I ended up striking up a friendship and kind of ongoing conversation with as time went on. And we just have developed a kind of a great back and forth with each other, where I've learned a lot about Judaism from her and Jewish history, but she's also been very open to learning about, the New Testament and things I've shared with her, or even some, prophecy in the Old Testament that talks of the coming Messiah. And, she hasn't embraced Christianity yet, but she is very open. And I just really value the conversations that, she and I have had. On another note regarding cultural intelligence, when I worked at Chase Bank, I started a monthly cultural conversation group where people in offices of Chase all over the world would join our Zoom session, and we talk about issues related to cultural intelligence. And every month was a different topic, and we would have a large number of people, at the bank join us because, Chase being a multinational company is very, culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, and we would work with people on our teams, potentially in other parts of the world, whether they be in Argentina or India or the UK. And so we would have just really rich conversations about maybe holidays and festivals that are celebrated in their country, or, food preferences or dietary restrictions. Dietary restrictions. We would also talk about, family upbringing and, how the respect toward, mother and father may differ in Asian countries versus here in the Western world. So the opportunities I've had to interact with people from other countries and cultures, whether from a worldview point of view or, with cultural intelligence, have been, extremely enriching, and I've grown tremendously through those. So I'm really thankful for those opportunities.
Yeah, we Christians should be the first ones to want to talk to people, the first ones to invite somebody into a conversation, the first ones to see the person who's sitting in the lunchroom all by themselves, the first one to invite new neighbors to the neighborhood, the first ones to seek to establish a common ground, because that really is the living out of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
It really is. I certainly agree, Jeff. But we just need to keep our eyes open and ask God to show us those opportunities, and then not worry about how uncomfortable it may seem at first. And I realize it can be very intimidating, but after taking that first step, you've broken the ice, and that opens the door.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It really means a lot. This is giving me a lot of food for thought.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jeff, for having me on your program. It's a great honor. I love what Summit has done and is doing. It's had a huge impact on me because it really introduced me to the whole concept of worldviews back in 2006 when I attended a Summit Adult Worldview Conference. Wow. And that just set my life on a completely new course. So you were actually one of the speakers on the topic of leadership at that adult conference in Colorado. And I just thank you and Dr. Noble and Summit for your huge impact in my life.
Wow. I appreciate that, brother. Thank you. Thank you to my guest, Richard Lombard, for coming on the show. You can go to WorldviewU, it's the letter U, .org to find more of his resources. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. At Summit, we come alongside the rising generation, their trainers, parents, and influencers, so that young adults may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. To learn more about Summit Ministries or get more resources to help the young people in your life embrace and share the truth that changes everything, just visit summit.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.